Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Talos of Tech, live on Twitch. I've had a fairly busy weekend, so I apologize for not having as many Twitch streams as you're probably used to, but life happens, and sometimes you got to prioritize those certain types of things. So I'm glad to be back, though. Glad we can make this work. Hopefully, the Starlink satellites bless us with a decent connection. But it has been improving, I've noticed a lot. In fact, they've even been keeping me posted with emails lately about what they're doing to ensure more reliable connections, and we should even have another Starlink launch later today. So satellites, the fleet is growing. But anyway, I wanted to talk about something Nick actually requested me to do a video on, but I felt like we've talked about it in the past, but it's kind of a in-depth topic that I thought would be better suited for a stream. Just because there's so many different ways you can take it. But essentially, we're talking about how much range, how much diversity there needs to be in the Apple Silicon lineup. So if you look at the Mac lineup pre-M1 chip, just Intel, we had quite a ton of diversity of different processors to choose from. The iMac's got certain CPUs and certain GPUs, and the MacBook Pro's got a different set of CPUs and GPUs, and the MacBook Air got a different CPU from the MacBook Pro, and the Mac Mini got a different CPU from the iMac, and it just creates this huge catalog of range of different processing and different GPU options that Apple Silicon is all, of course, supposed to replace within the next about year. If you consider that it was quadruple UDC last year that they announced the Apple Silicon transition would take around 2 years, and the PowerPC to Intel transition didn't even take the full 2 years, even though they said it would take two. So Nick on the podcast even was suggesting that we could have pretty much all of the Mac lineup transitioned over to Apple Silicon by the end of 2021. I think that might be a little bit too quick. I could see Apple taking up a bit more of that 2-year timeline they laid out, mostly because of the Mac Pro. iMacs and MacBook Pros, I think I'm in agreement there. I do believe that almost, if not all, pretty much the majority of the iMac and all MacBook Pros will be Apple Silicon by the end of this year. And we're already 1 quarter in, so it's really not that far away. I'm excited to see, yes, quadruple UDC, what they're planning on unveiling there, which I really, really hope there's hardware. There wasn't any hardware last year, but there should be potentially a few site refreshes right before. There could even be some site refreshes next week, as far as we know. I think Kang was saying to expect the mini LED iPad Pro to launch like mid-April, which is literally, like a week from now. So that's kind of exciting, but yeah, if this is to be true, what I'm very curious to see how Apple handles, and I'd love to get your guys' opinion on, is how many different tiers of Apple Silicon do we really have, right? Like with the A series of chips, we basically have the iPhone line, which is, A10, A11, A12, A13, A14, and then occasionally with the iPads, we get an X series, which is like that chip, but a bit more powerful, a bit faster. So we have A10X chip, and then we didn't get A11. It's not like a consistent thing we get every year, but we did get A12X chip, and we didn't get A13X, but we did get A12Z for some reason. But we are expecting now that as soon as next week we could get a 14X chip on the next generation iPad Pro that would probably be very similar in performance to the M1, just maybe without a Thunderbolt controller, and it's just not quite exactly the same as the M1, but it's mostly a branding difference. So there's like 2 different tiers there, essentially. iPads get higher-end iPads, I should say, because there are a lot of iPads that just get the exact same chips as older iPhones, like the budget iPad or the iPad Air got the A14 chip. But when it comes to the iPad Pro lineup, they typically get an X series version of the iPhone chips, and the iPhones basically get one class of chip that gets upgraded once a year. A 14 chip, a 13 chip, a 12. They all pretty much launch in around the September-October timeframe. iPad Air is the only thing throwing all this off. Aside from that, it's pretty consistent. Now with the Mac, we have a bit more complication, at least with the Intel lineup of Macs. We definitely have multiple different iMacs with different GPU options. We have multiple different MacBooks with Airs and Pros, and we even had the 12-inch MacBook in there for a while that was using a different type of CPU. And then we have the Mac Pro, the Mac Mini, and the iMacs. So how many different tiers are there? Personally, I think there should be including the M1, I think there should be around 3, simply because this is a Apple. It's silicon going into a device that actually truly takes advantage of these processing speeds and these graphics chips that are integrated or dedicated. That there's rumors Apple might do one or the other. I believe it. There were certain developer videos Apple was talking about where they were showing that they might. I think they may have confirmed they were developing their own discrete GPUs, but we just haven't seen them yet. Or there's some people speculating that they're still technically going to use AMD GPUs that just work in conjunction with their Apple Silicon. I don't really see that happening personally, but I could be wrong there. Also, Scott, thank you for the Twitch Prime for 29 months. Holy cow, that's a long time. Thank you. And Matt Apple donated 10 bits, says my school is Eastern time, but I'm in California and my time zones are destroyed. Okay, got to do some 3-hour plus minus addition. Hope you can make it work. Let's see. The A to Z series is the AX series, but with more focus on multi-core. I like how you say series like there's been more than one. It's pretty much just the A12Z chip was just a less binned A12X chip. It's pretty much the exact same chip, except they received a better return on the success of the different GPU cores. Anyway, Matthew says, I think there's going to be 4. M1 has the 13-inch MacBook Air and the 13-inch MacBook Pro and the Mac Mini, and then M1X, which is the 14-inch MacBook Pro and the high-end Mac Mini, and then the 24 and also the 24-inch iMac that would also have the M1X. And then he's saying on top of that, they'll also have M1Z, and that M1Z is just a bit faster than the M1X, and that supports the 16-inch MacBook Pro and the 32-inch iMac, and then the M1T does the Mac Pro, which I think goes a tad more in line with how the Intel lineup has been, with just like all these different levels of, you've got your low-end MacBooks with the Air and Pro, which, by the way, did not use the same CPUs before. In fact, I believe for a while there, the 10th generation Intel chips were in the MacBook Air, but they were slower than the 8th generation Intel chips that they were still shipping in the MacBook Pro. So what Matthew just suggested is having 4 and kind of making the Mac Pro this like king above all that has some type of hyper speed custom Apple silicon that beats out even the 28-core cheese grater Mac Pro that they're selling for $50,000 or whatever. And I think that makes a lot of sense, mainly because I have a difficult time understanding how Apple silicon is going to outclass every single Intel processor Apple is using in the Mac Pro and also be shipped in somewhat affordable Macs like the redesigned iMac or the 16-inch MacBook Pro, which is possibly why I disagreed a bit with Nick saying that there basically only needs to be 2 tiers. He's saying M1 and then M1X. And that X chip goes in the Mac Pro, it goes in all the iMacs, it goes in all the MacBook Pros, and that's going to be way more faster than the M1, and that'll outperform even the 28-core Mac Pro. I don't know how possible or feasible that is, but from a business perspective, I feel like it wouldn't make much sense to keep so much of the Mac line available if they were going to be so similar at the end of the day and have equal performance on a 14-inch MacBook Pro. That's the same level of performance. Maybe it's a little bit different because of the cooling architecture, but about the same level of performance as a dedicated Mac Pro that they could sell for several thousands of dollars that doesn't come with a screen and it's just a box. But I think that's what Nick was getting into, is Nick was really interested in seeing basically just there's no need for a Mac Pro anymore or even a Mac Mini. You just have the tower that covers both the Mac Mini demographic and the Mac Pro demographic, and that Apple Silicon inside it is so powerful that it just covers all bases. But I have a feeling that if they were to make $2,000 Mac towers that were more powerful than the 28-core Mac Pro, then there would be substantially less revenue than what they're experiencing today. I feel like there would be not a reason for people to be spending $5,000 to $10,000 on Macs, which I know Intel is partially responsible because they're charging Apple through the roof to put their high-end CPUs and stuff like the iMac Pro or the Mac Pro, but I think that's not all part of the story. I do still believe Apple is going to want people spending $10,000 or more on certain Macs if they really, really want the performance. I do think that Apple's going to want that revenue to be secured and have some range between, okay, this is faster, this is better than the M1 chip, but it's not quite as fast as the M1T, like Matthew's talking about, and having a bit more tiers there. I don't know if I'll go as far as to say there needs to be 4 tiers, although I wouldn't mind it because I like the idea of the Mac Pro getting some type of exclusive chip that you can't get on anything else. I think that fans of the Mac Pro out there and people that are willing to spend pretty much anything, that they're willing to essentially write a blank check to get whatever the most powerful Mac is. That's kind of what the Mac Pro stands for right now. Like it's modular, it's upgradable, and it costs you like more than a Tesla for a lot of people. But because of that being in existence, YouTubers, movie studios are going to be like, this is the fastest Mac I can get, and I want to make sure that whatever Mac I'm using, there's no faster one in existence. So that's why they're going to spend $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 on that Mac. And I don't think Apple's just going to suddenly want to abandon that and make all Macs under $5,000. I get that from a consumer's perspective, that sounds amazing, that the fastest Mac in the world will only be about $3,000 and you won't have a need for spending big wobs of cash on anything anymore. Wobs, is that a unit of measurement people use? But I could see maybe 3 tiers being a bit more believable, because something to keep in mind is that just looking at how Apple has rolled out the first Apple Silicon chip with the M1, they've put it in many different devices that people were not expecting. All last year, I remember people talking about what's the first device that's going to get Apple Silicon. And there were a few people saying MacBook Pro, the 13-inch variant, and there were a few people saying the MacBook Air, which I always thought the MacBook Air made the most amount of sense because it's a device not supposed to be good at performance. It's a device that's supposed to be good at power efficiency and the basics. And I always thought that if you wanted to demonstrate Apple Silicon in a way that was effective and say, hey, look how reliable it is, look how fast it is, and how power efficient it is, some type of thin and light MacBook. I think for a while even I suggested them bring back the 12-inch MacBook design and give a whole separate lineup and just say this is what Apple Silicon can do and have it outperform all the other MacBooks. But there were times I recall saying either the 12-inch MacBook or the MacBook Air, just because you could demo the efficiency of it. And what ended up actually happening that November? We got Mac Mini, which no one really saw coming. The Mac Mini got refreshed, the MacBook Air got refreshed, and the MacBook Pro got refreshed. So with one Apple Silicon launch, they transitioned almost 3. I say almost because they still kept around the Intel Mac Mini for some reason, though I imagine the sales for that thing must be flatlining right now. I doubt anybody's buying the Intel version of the Mac Mini. There's probably like 5 people out there that are just going to be like, I needed the 4-port version. Okay, that's great. You should have bought refurbished, though, just saying. And then the MacBook Pro, obviously, only the 2-port variant got the M1, not the rest of the lineup. But stretched across 3 different markets, they created one chip that covered a lot of ground, which they never used Intel chips to cover this many different lineups. They never put the same Intel chip in a Tower, a MacBook Air with no fans, and a MacBook Pro with fans. So I think it's safe to somewhat say that Apple is okay with simplifying the lineup a bit and not having that many different tiers of the M series of chips. I don't think it'll be as minimal as 2, because you're going to have a bunch of people that want to spend gobs of money on the most powerful Mac they can, and if they knew that chip was the same as the 14-inch MacBook Pro chip, everyone would probably just not buy the Mac Pro and everyone would just buy a notebook and save themselves some money, and then Apple would miss out on huge revenue gains. But I don't know if I'll go as far as to say as they'll do 4, because that does sound rather complicated. I don't disagree with the idea of the Mac Pro getting some type of exclusive either discrete GPU or ultra powerful M1T chip that separates itself vastly from the rest of the lineup. But I do think that your M1X and M1Z chips might end up being pretty close in the same tier. Essentially, the processing they put in the 14-inch MacBook Pro and 16-inch MacBook Pro might not be that different, and that same silicon they put in those the rest of the MacBook Pro lineup that's currently on Intel, whatever chips they give those things will probably be the same chips they give the iMacs, and those all getting bunched into that mid-tier category that says way faster than the M1, still really powerful, still has pretty great graphics, and still is able to support 4 Thunderbolt ports, not 2. But it's not the fastest, and that's what they'll reserve the Mac Pro for, which honestly, Apple Silicon Mac Pro, I wouldn't honestly be shocked if they decided to wait until next year on that one. Maybe quadruple UDC next year. That'll be like the very last thing that gets transitioned. Simply because they started selling the cheese grater Mac Pro like very end of 2019, and for them to discontinue it and take it off the site like 1 year later, I don't know. That sounds odd to me. But hey, thank you for the 200 bits, Chris Norton. I see you. He said hello. Thank you very much. Matt Apple says getting a maxed 16-inch MacBook Pro when it comes out. That will be quite the mobile beast. I'm very excited to see hopefully a redesign on that front with the updated ports, and also the mini LED display can hopefully come to that thing this year. I feel like the leaks and rumors are always a little bit ahead of themselves when it comes to mini LED. I legit, I kid you not, I remember last year people saying, don't buy the 2020 iPad Pro because there's going to be a mini LED version in October that'll have 5G, A14X chip, and a mini LED display. People were saying it would come out October of 2020, and here we are in April, and it's like, maybe next week, maybe. We'll see. So that's how I feel about the mini LED. Is there's a suspicion of mine that we might get a more minor Apple Silicon refresh for the MacBook Pro, but not a redesign. And then later, maybe next year, we'll get the redesign or something like that. Mike, thank you very much, who says, I'm a fully born Talos of Tech Twitch subscriber. Yeah, 9 months. Congratulations. I was just talking to Louise about how whenever they announce when a baby's born, they love saying the weight. What does that come from? She's 7 pounds, 9 ounces. Okay. It's like another fun fact there. But is it like a flex for the mom? She's like, see, if that was a 10-pound baby, that was a lot of work. But if it's a 6-pound baby, piece of cake, who cares? What's with the weight thing? Did someone ask that once? Did someone give birth and they were like, hey, the baby's born, it's okay. And they were like, how much does it weigh though? What's its resting heart rate? How big is its nose and relative to its eyes? I don't know. Where does the weight thing come from? Anyway, let's see. I still like Nick's idea about daisy chaining Mac Minis together. I'm in favor of that. I just don't know how much can really be daisy chained from the Thunderbolt ports. There's only so much data they can transfer between themselves. And I like the idea of making Mac Mini super modular, and you can just, if you want twice the power of the M1 chip, you just buy 2 M1 Mac Minis and you put them together, and you just have some cables that plug them in the back. But something tells me it's not that simple. I'm no computer engineer who knows all about GPUs and CPUs working together, but I believe that there's a bit more complexity to it than that. Plus, you probably would have to plug in, like if you wanted to daisy chain like 4 Mac Minis together, wouldn't they all need their own power supply? So you got to take up like 4 power outlets in your surge protector. I don't know how sustainable that is. It's like, no, they power each other. The Thunderbolt port powers it enough to power the whole thing, so you only need one power cable. I don't know. I don't think it's that simple, because there's only so much data you can carry between. So there's probably actions that if you try to divide them between multiple different chips, they can't work as efficiently because they have to be sending a huge amount of data between the different Thunderbolt ports. I don't think it is. Otherwise, more people would be doing it, or Apple would be doing it. That's the way I see it. Matthew says, it very much depends. With the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro, and again with the 24 and 32-inch iMac, if Apple wants to do what they have done with the iPad and make the screen size the only difference, then I could see them only having 3 processors. Yeah, I could go either way. What is better, though? Do we want more range? Do we want more diversity? On one hand, you could make the argument of, if there's less diversity, that means that you don't have to buy something big to be powerful. Like, I kind of dig that idea. There's a lot of people out there that always just wanted to get the 16-inch MacBook Pro simply because it was the most powerful one, but they prefer the design and the portability of the 14-inch one. It was just that one was weaker. That one wasn't as powerful, so they didn't want to get it. But imagine if the power was equal and you didn't have that difference, which is, yeah, like you said, that's the difference we have with iPads right now. Whether you get the 12.9-inch version or the 11-inch version, you get the same speed. I think that's kind of nice. From a consumer's perspective, I would say it's pretty dope to kind of not have to think about, do I want the fast one or do I want the small one, right? You don't want those two to be the deciding factors. You want just let me pick the size, whatever I'm comfortable with. If someone wants a 24-inch iMac over a 32-inch one, so be it. They can save themselves some money, hopefully. It's a cheaper version because the display isn't as big, requires less materials overall. Most of the money's probably still going towards the silicon, but if you can save yourself a couple $100 and have a smaller screen, same amount of performance, I'd say that's pretty nice. But on the other hand, I can totally get the opposite argument of, well, I don't want, if it's possible for you to fit a more powerful chip or a discrete GPU into the larger size, and it's not really possible to fit that dedicated hardware into the smaller size, then yeah, allow the 32-inch iMac to be faster. Allow the 16-inch MacBook Pro to have an extra GPU core in there or some extra discrete graphics thing you can pull from. And or my desk don't have space for 32-inch monitor. Yeah, I mean, the 32-inch monitor will probably, the 32-inch iMac will probably be a very similar footprint to the 27-inch iMac, just because the 27-inch iMac is honestly bigger than it needs to be. Like, I've used much smaller 27-inch monitors, even though they're still 27 inches. The bezels on the iMac Pro, I'm looking at them right now as I'm reading the chat. The bezels on this thing are huge, and then you factor in the ginormous chin on the bottom of the iMac. It's just way bigger than it really needs to be. And if you took iPad Pro levels of bezel and made a 32-inch screen, it would probably be pretty similar in size to this iMac. But either way, if you don't have the space for that, the 24-inch would probably be perfect for a ton of people. And if you didn't have a performance loss by choosing that smaller size, that would be great. But again, like, if you can fit better hardware into one model, or an extra fan that allows the CPU to run at a higher clock speed, and that in return results in better performance, then I would totally understand that as well. I mean, if you were planning on getting the bigger size anyway, because you were just like 24 inches is too small, or I don't want the 14-inch MacBook Pro, I want the 16-inch MacBook Pro because it's the biggest and I like having all that screen real estate. I must say, when it comes down to size, like, I dig the portability of things like the MacBook Air or the 13-inch MacBook Pro, but when I reviewed that 16-inch MacBook Pro back in 2019, that screen was awesome. Every time I opened it, I just felt like I had this giant screen. It's like it was the biggest portable monitor I'd ever used. Like, it felt huge every time I was editing on it, for the fact that I could still fold it up, and it was heavy and it was kind of bulky, but just the fact that I could take it with me and look at a screen that big and use it on the couch or use it in bed, it's awesome. Like, I kind of dug that size. And if it was possible that, okay, I'm getting the bigger size anyway, and then you find out, oh, the bigger size comes with better performance, or in this case, I think it's pretty likely that the bigger size would come with better battery life, because 16-inch MacBook Pro is going to have a lot more space inside for, the barely legal battery that they put in the 16-inch MacBook Pro. That's like the very, very limit of what you can take on a plane for lithium-ion batteries. They're like, okay, it's like the biggest possible battery we can fit in this thing without it being illegal to take on a flight. So that might result in better battery life, especially with the high-efficiency cores that Apple puts in their silicon. So if they could have that type of extreme battery life with that huge a battery, you could potentially be looking at like a 30-hour battery life on that MacBook Pro, which might be a very good reason to upgrade over the 13-inch model, which might still probably have around the same battery life as the M1 MacBook Pro. Only difference I think that might affect battery life is if the chip they put in that MacBook is a bit more power hungry, M1X or M2, however they call it. And then I believe the 4-port MacBook Pros typically have 2 fans in them, not one. The 2-port MacBook Pro has 1 fan inside. So it's like every 2 USB-C ports you get 1 fan. They might change that with Apple Silicon because they're like, it doesn't need to be that cool all the time. But yeah, that having 2 fans running might be a little bit more power hungry. Let's see. tvOS got a new coat of paint in 2019. macOS got a new coat of paint last year. Do you think iOS will get one this year? Not anything too big. I'm not talking about them completely rethinking the functionality. I still expect the regular grid of icons, but maybe a slight facelift to make it more consistent with the other OSs. I guess did tvOS get a fresh coat of paint? I don't know. I felt like that was more of a tweak than a fresh coat of paint. Big Sur was definitely a fresh coat of paint. They changed all the icons and made it look all iPadOS like and gave all this weird shading. And there was actually quite a bit of controversy with a lot of the icons they made with the Mac. But I don't know. I feel like Apple has reached the point where iOS is so massive and they have such a large user base that they're kind of hesitant for any kind of drastic change that they would not really mind doing back in iOS 6 to iOS 7 days. That was probably the biggest UI overhaul ever, mainly because of the transition to Johnny Ive in the software design department. But I don't know. I feel like if they did a drastic paint overhaul with all the icons and stuff, it might throw a bunch of people off, or some people won't like the differences. I mean, they already get that. Like, they just changed the music icon with iOS 14, I thought. It was a white icon, and then they changed it back to red, and all of a sudden everyone's like, oh gosh, I hate the red. How do you feel? Do you want the old one back? And all these polls going everywhere. And people are very, very picky about the icons. But at the same time, I notice a ton of people just saying they want it to look different, not because it would functionally help with anything. They're bored. They're just bored of looking at the same icons. Let's change the icons to what? I don't know. Just change them. But you got to remember, anytime you change them to something, you take the risk of people preferring the old way. So you got to be really, really careful with those icon change or the UI overhaul things, because that's most likely going to cause a bunch of people to love them and probably a bunch of people to hate them. And I don't know if that's the type of controversy Apple wants to mess around with. I'm okay with them looking for functional benefits. Like, for me, the pop-up thing is a functional thing. It's not so much. I don't have that many aesthetic complaints with iOS. There's not a bunch of things I'm like, oh, that icon could look nicer. But yeah, I don't know. See, like, if they brought just like the Big Sur icons that have a tad more shading, it's just like the lighting's a bit different on all the icons, and they look a bit more, what's the term, skeuomorphic, and they brought those icons to iOS or something like that, I'd be like, yeah, okay. That's something that probably a bunch of people wouldn't even notice. Like, when my mom or dad upgrade their phones, I doubt they would even notice that type of change. But someone like me who pays attention to little details like that would be like, oh, cool, now the icon looks the same on the Mac as it does on the phone. Yeah, that type of thing, I'd be like, okay, fine. That is what I would recommend, but I don't know if you would consider that like a new coat of paint or just like minor tweaks of like, oh, you can tell this phone's on iOS 15 and this phone's on iOS 14 because the little messages icon has a tad more shading now. That type of thing I wouldn't mind. Skeuomorphic is neomorphic. Well, wonderful. That explains so much. Yeah, we still get frame drops occasionally, but actually they haven't been too bad lately. We've lost on this stream 2.5% of frames, which is pretty low. And keep in mind, Xfinity dropped frames too. It wasn't like they never dropped a single frame. But Starlink used to drop a lot more frames than it's been dropping, which is good. They sent me this email, which was kind of exciting. They reached out to everybody on the beta and explained preventative maintenance here. They were saying this was caused the issues we were facing with the frame drops before. They were saying preventative maintenance on various ground gateways coupled with a network logic bug that intermittently caused some packet processing services to hang until they were reset. The good news is fixes were implemented and users should no longer see this particular issue. So I don't know if that was the only cause of the frame drops, but that was at least a big part of it because I'm not noticing them as often. They still happen, but we're not out of beta yet. And they are expanding. So Starlink now offers limited beta service in Canada, United Kingdom, Germany, and New Zealand. So they're taking deposits from those places. They're saying as more users come online, the team is seeing an increase in surges of activity, particularly during peak hours. The gateway infrastructure to support these types of surges is in place, but we are awaiting final regulatory approval to use all available channels. So I guess there's a few more channels they plan on using that could better help when there's like surges of lots of people using tons of internet at the same time. They also talked about connecting to the best satellite, which is something I joke about whenever OBS struggles a little bit. Is there increased lag when streaming with the Starlink beta? I don't think so. There are frame drops on occasion, but the lag shouldn't be terribly different. It says, your Starlink speaks to a single satellite assigned to your terminal for a particular period of time. In the future, if communication with your assigned satellite is interrupted for any reason, your Starlink will seamlessly switch to a different satellite, resulting in far fewer network disruptions. There can only be one satellite connected to your Starlink at any time, but this feature will allow for choice of the best satellite. This feature will be available to most beta users in April and is expected to deliver one of our most notable reliability improvements to date, which means everything before April, if it was searching for a satellite, it would probably take a few seconds to find one and connect to it, whereas now it's supposed to be able to seamlessly go back and forth. So it'll basically have an additional satellite on retainer, on backup, that says, okay, I'm going to instantly switch to that satellite if I lose connection with this one. And then it switches to the next one, which should result in much better reliability. And I will say that I've noticed it get better even since I posted my Starlink review. Of course, as I'm saying this, the frames drops a bit, but OBS tells me exactly how many kilobits per second I'm getting when I live stream. And it'll dip down, and this is normal. This is what happened with Comcast as well. It would dip down to lower speeds momentarily. But with Starlink, more recently, it hasn't been dipping down to zero as much. When I first got on the beta, there would be several times while live streaming where it would go all the way down to zero for a couple seconds and then jump back up. And in the past few weeks, it hasn't gone down to zero. It'll just go from like 2,000 to 1,000, or for a second it'll go down to like 500, but that way you can still hear me. Whenever there's a bit of a connection, I can still get my audio through to you, and my face might freeze up for a few seconds, but I notice it less. And I did the whole Tech and EV podcast last Saturday on Starlink with FaceTime, and we never dropped signal for like 3 hours, which when I first signed up for Starlink, probably once every 20 to 30 minutes, I would lose connection with whoever I was FaceTiming for probably 5, maybe 10 seconds, and then it would come back. Whereas that time, it was like a full 3.5 hour FaceTime call, and it never was interrupted. We talked. They could hear me through the whole thing. I could hear them through the whole thing. There wasn't any issues, which is cool, knowing that there's like noticeable improvements to the connection within the first like month and a half of owning the service. So speeds are good too. I've been doing speed tests and consistently over 150, which is the max speed they promised on the beta. They're like probably 150, and I'm getting 180, 200, which is dope. Anyway, don't get me started on Starlink. I'll keep going. You know me and SpaceX. I can't shut up about them. I officially switched from HughesNet to Starlink. Awesome, 20View. I'm happy for you. That's great, because HughesNet, that was the first satellite internet my family tried way back in the day when we basically just had dial-up and we wanted some type of internet that worked, and HughesNet was just awful. Like, basically we would lose internet if it was cloudy. It didn't even have to be raining. And then they had a very, very low data cap. We would just watch like a few YouTube videos and they'd be like, oh, you used up all your data and now the speeds are basically unusable. So that kind of made me swear off satellite internet for the longest time. I was like, oh, satellite internet's stupid and impractical. But now seeing how Starlink is being done and how many different satellites you're connecting to and how fast the speeds can be and how the speeds can be really fast, even in the cloudy weather, even in the rain and the hail, and even in the snow, people are still getting decent speeds. I'm like, dang, okay, this is the future. If I knew long ago that you'd be able to get, high-speed internet, even in the rain, even in the clouds, anywhere on Earth, I would have said satellite internet. This is the future. But back in HughesNet days where there was only 1 or 2 satellites to connect to and the connection was interrupted by clouds, I was like, oh yeah, this is just ridiculous. There's no point to this. Anyway, BVOG T3000 says, just got the 16 gigabyte M1 Mac Mini last week. I have 5 screens, 2 native and 3 over display link, and it handles it all with no problem. Can't wait to see what they do next. That's interesting. I didn't realize you could do display link. I've heard of that, but I've never used it. 2 natively. Yeah, I'm somewhat tempted to go back to having 2 monitors. I used to do 3, but I felt like that was overkill. And I usually have my iPad running next to me anyway, so there was more like 4 screens at me at all times. But I just felt like I was putting stuff on other screens that I wasn't even using. I was just throwing stuff up on a screen just so that it would be there. And I was like, you know what? I was like, you know what? I want to go a bit more minimal. Ooh, Starlink launch. Speaking of, that's funny. T-minus 30 minutes until Falcon 9 is going to launch another 60 satellites. I wish they could tell you what the trajectory was. You kind of have to eyeball it when you're watching the live stream to see where the satellites are headed, but I wish they could tell you, like, these satellites are going to service these regions or these cities. That would be cool. YouTube channel's really informative and helpful, especially love your Starlink video. Oh, thank you. I'm just a diehard SpaceX fan, honestly. Like, I follow them as closely as I can, and I go on record a lot saying that if SpaceX had like a GoFundMe or a Patreon page, I would love to support it. So the fact that I could get internet out of supporting them is just awesome, and I despise Comcast with a passion. So that just has turned me into this ultra SpaceX fan. I was just thinking of Starlink this morning. I was like, I wish they had like an annual option where you could save money. Even if you didn't save money, even if you just had to spend $1,200 once a year, I would rather do that than pay $100 a month. Let SpaceX have some of that capital up front, right? Let us buy in bulk. Like on the Starlink payment page right now, they literally gray out the make a payment button when your bill is paid. Like, I cannot send SpaceX my money. Come on. I'm trying to fix this, SpaceX. I wish that you could, if you wanted to pay for 5 years in advance, you could just pay for 5 years in advance. That's kind of how our energy bill works right now with electricity and gas. We realized that, whenever you want to pay with a credit card, they charge a one-time convenience fee, which is annoying. The only way to, it's not even a credit card. I think they charge it with debit cards as well. The only way to get around this like $1 fee is if you like write in a check and mail it to them or something. Which we don't feel like doing. So we just realized that, hey, if we pay for like a year's worth of electricity up front and we put it on our credit card, we're going to get a lot of cash back that will cover the entire cost of the convenience fee. So we paid for, I think, like 6 months of electricity up front. And then just whatever you use, it deducts that from your balance until you actually start owing again. And then we'll probably do another big lump sum because it's the same fee every time you pay. So essentially the less times you pay, the less fees you pay. So if you can pay a bunch up front, that's ideal. I live in Enrico, Virginia, USA, and was wondering what are some good Comcast internet alternatives. That's the problem. I don't know what it's like in Virginia. My buddy Randy's going to be there in a few months, so maybe you can ask him, but that's the biggest problem with United States internet providers is that if you... Sorry, Starlink's looking. I know I'm lagging. But they don't really have many options. That's the thing. Comcast, most people I've talked to that have Comcast kind of hate them. They pretty much all have bad stories about customer service, or they have bad things to say about the billing or the sales tactics, or them trying to bundle things with you. Pretty much everybody hates them, but the reason there's so many stories and so many reasons people hate them is because everybody kind of has to use them. There's not really great alternatives. There's not a bunch of ISPs out there that are going to provide equal service for better price. Otherwise, no one would use Comcast, right? The reason they're so big is because everybody has no choice. They essentially have a monopoly, which always makes me laugh when I find a federal government doing investigations on, is Apple a monopoly, is Google a monopoly, is all these different, is Amazon a monopoly, and they all make their cases as to why they're not actually that good, they're not actually that powerful, we're not that big, until you watch their events, and then they're like, oh no, we're huge, we're big. But companies like Comcast are sometimes the only company running internet for certain neighborhoods and certain streets that people just literally don't have an option. They can't go elsewhere. Okay, let's see what Scott is saying. He's saying Verizon has Fios and certain Fios. Sorry, I know every time I read it, someone's going to tell me I pronounced it wrong. They have Fios in certain parts of Virginia, far better than Comcast. We had both when we lived there and went back to Verizon because of how awful Comcast was. So I've heard that being a good alternative for many people. I don't know how much cheaper it is. I've never had it available where I live, but I've heard people say that. I'm glad that M1 Mac Mini is supporting all those different display links, though. That's awesome. I love that leading up to the M1 launch, like no one was expecting a Mac Mini to come out. No one thought that would be a thing. And yet now, like the M1 Mac Mini has just kind of become like we can't make a tech podcast without bringing it up. Like we can't stop talking about it. We can't stop bragging about how amazing it is that you can get so much performance in such a small cheap machine that's from Apple, because they're not really known for doing the great specs for the low price thing. And that's just become just such an easy recommendation. I think it's also partly because of the pandemic. A lot of people working from home now. There's less and less people that really need a laptop to take with them on the go. So that's why M1 Mac Mini has just kind of become the coolest kid on the block. There's probably like the most recommended Mac right now. Honestly, I don't see many people recommending any Intel Mac at this time. Like, there's really no point, especially knowing that there could be a ton more Apple Silicon Macs by the end of this year. People are just like, so if I'm not interested in getting a Mac Mini or a MacBook Air, what Mac should I get? Everyone's like, just wait. Don't get any Mac with Intel in it right now. That's how everyone feels. I read Narelle says, it is also the problem of Israel's rural areas. I can have, or Bezek, which is very slow, 20 down, or having no internet, and in the law we cannot buy our router, have to rent it, pay separately for wired internet and wireless internet. That is weird. I've heard about that in Israel, but I don't understand what the logic is with that law. But yeah, I've heard kind of weird internet practices there. So it's safe to say, like, all these different internet service providers, it's not going to be feasible. It's not just a matter of greed or capitalism. It's just a simple matter of it does not make sense for a lot of rural areas, especially in more third world countries or countries that don't have adequate infrastructures for running tons and tons of either coax cable or fiber optic internet. Like, it's not practical for them to run all those wires everywhere. Like, probably because the end cost to the consumer would end up being probably 10 times the price that someone's willing to pay. So they'd run all the internet and then no one would sign up for it. So it's literally just impractical to imagine that a lot of these rural areas on Earth are ever going to get good internet just from traditional running cables and stuff. So we need a drastic fundamental reapproach to how to bring fast internet to the rest of the planet, because there's still billions of people that don't have it. And still hundreds of millions of people that have internet, but not good internet. And they don't really have a choice for getting anything better. So that's where I think Starlink is so exciting and has so much potential. Is it's like we find a company that is able to launch tons of satellites affordably and quickly. And there's other global internet companies coming up. I think OneWeb, or I think Blue Origin wanted to try to come up with some, but they can't launch as many satellites and they can't do it as affordably. And it is kind of a race. It's in a way, it's like an internet space race, because whoever comes out with this global internet high-speed, low-latency service first that anybody pretty much on Earth can sign up for, they're going to have a significant advantage over anybody that comes next. I know there's several different companies that are going to try to do a Starlink-style internet approach, but NASA already has kind of strict guidelines on how many satellites we can have orbiting the planet. A lot of people think Starlink is crazy for having thousands of satellites that go around the Earth, but you definitely know that if more companies say, like, well, Starlink has a few thousand satellites, can we also put up a few thousand? They're going to be like, sorry, it's getting kind of crowded, or Starlink already has bought out the next few waves of satellites, and they're going to have dominance in this field because they're going to be doing it first, which means that's what people are going to be comfortable with. They're already going to have it set up for it. So are those types of customers going to just drop their Starlink dish and not want to pay for it anymore and go with someone else that has less satellites and probably less reliability? And maybe in time they build out the network and make it faster and more reliable, but still, like, they're probably not going to be as global, and probably because of the rocket launches they use are not going to make it as profitably, which means it's going to be difficult for them to make a price competitive match with Starlink. So yeah, it is kind of a race. It is kind of a matter of whoever gets to this internet service providing level first is going to have drastically high advantages over whoever comes second. So the fact that Starlink is first to this is a big deal, and I think that puts them in a really, really strong point to where they can do whatever they want, essentially. Like if someone comes up and says, "Hey, we're going to be cheaper than Starlink. It's going to be $75 a month for our service." Starlink can just be like, "Okay, now ours is $70." And now boom, they're out of business. Or Starlink could just simply have different tiers. Like if the other service is offering a cheaper version of what Starlink is, but the speeds aren't as good, Starlink could very easily, just with the flip of a few switches, decide, okay, we're going to have a high-speed plan and a low-speed plan. And the what the heck am I saying? The low-speed plan is going to be more affordable to countries that can't maybe afford the $100 a month, but they would be fine with 100 megabits down. So they don't need gigabit speeds that we're offering on our full speed plans. So if you're not crazy about having the full speed, you don't need gigabit, you just want better than nothing, or you just want better than 20, like you're saying in Israel, then you can pay us a lower rate at $70 a month or $50 a month, and you'll get lower speeds, but you'll have internet that's better than anything in your area. So, yeah, that would make a matched upload download plan would be nice. It would. I agree. I feel like there's a lot of infrastructure that's designed to not allow for that. Again, I'm no expert in this field, but I've been told that it's not as simple as just like flip a switch and make the upload the download. Otherwise, Comcast would be doing that, and I think Starlink could do that if they really wanted to, but there's probably a reason they don't. We don't have good internet in most parts of India, mostly rural. But in the big cities, we have really good internet for really, really cheap prices. Whenever I hear you pay $100 for Wi-Fi, my first reaction is, dang, that's expensive. You can get gigabit internet for $70 here if you lived in the cities. Yeah, that's not different from the U.S. It just depends on where you live. It's in the cities, yeah, like Sam from iUpdate, he gets gigabit up and down for $70 a month because basically anywhere that has fiber optics, you can get gigabit for pretty cheap. I just happen to live in a place that doesn't run fiber optics because I live in a pretty rural area. But India in general, almost everything is cheaper there because the average income per citizen is very low compared to other countries. So if any type of major business wants to have a market there, they have to price a lot lower and account for more scale. Whereas because India has so many people living there, whereas the United States has substantially less, but the average income per citizen is a lot higher, so that's why they can charge a bit more because they don't have that scale, but they have that deeper pocket. But it's not even really to say most of us are rich. Most Americans are in debt. So it's not necessarily that we have more money to spend. It's also more that we're just okay with putting things on credit cards and going into substantial debt, which is unfortunately very, very common here. I don't know if that's the same thing in India, but yeah, credit cards are extremely popular in the U.S. and people racking up all their limits and people spending more than they have. That's a very common thing in the United States. I'm having trouble getting Logitech Capture and Streamlabs working on my M1 Mac Mini. You should watch Nick Answeeney's channel. He's done videos about what hardware he uses to stream with his M1. I've heard that his Mac Mini didn't like his cam link or has had issues with Elgato streaming capture cards and that kind of thing. But hopefully in time they can get all that ironed out. Scott says, I think Starlink's biggest competitor for rural areas isn't the cable companies or other satellite companies, but the cell phone carriers. If someone can get decent LTE speeds in the middle of nowhere, that's a huge hit to Starlink. That's already I know what you're saying, Scott, but that's already a market Starlink is disrupting because from what I've seen, when I was waiting for my Starlink package to arrive, I basically watched every YouTube video that had Starlink in the title. Not joking. I was literally looking up channels with like 2 subscribers talking about their Starlink beta experience and skipping to their speed tests and watching them set it up. And like a substantial number of the people that were getting the Starlink beta and installing it were people not using satellite internet. They were people using their phone cellular plan or buying some type of modem that can tap into LTE. But the truth is, most of the demographics Starlink is targeting are places that do not have great LTE coverage. It's already one of the reasons I despise 5G so much is because there are still a ton of places that don't have great LTE. And going out to those places where population density isn't very high and making a big tower with great range with adequate cellular speeds and then trying to sell someone a modem that taps into those speeds, profitability-wise is not going to be as simple as just having a global fleet of satellites that are already up there. And there's really not much maintenance other than the ground stations because you're not going to go up to satellites and tinker with them. But as we're about to see, SpaceX can pump out these satellites really quickly and send up like 4 launches in a month and land those rockets and reuse those rockets again, instead of building out all these cell towers, which are going to cover a few square miles instead of just the planet. And Starlink is also really easy to scale into more countries. Like I talked about the whole setup process of basically the box they shipped me almost has no words. Like there's no letters in English or anything. It's pretty much all just plug it in, point it at the sky, and you have that scalability of all of these different packages and all these different products we can ship to people. We can ship this to someone in Africa or in Nigeria, or we can ship this to someone in New York, and they'll be able to plug it in and set it up. The only difference is really just the power outlet at the end of which the whole system is on one power cable. So it's one small thing to change. To me, that's a lot more scalable than just saying like, we're going to go after the home internet market by putting up more cell towers, because carriers have already shown they're not interested in really expanding much coverage. They just want to brag about 5G in more places. So, let's see. I'm looking at HughesNet. How good is that? Not good. Wouldn't recommend HughesNet. Very slow. Try to pre-order Starlink and get on Starlink as soon as you can, because that's going to be substantially better than HughesNet. Hopefully they can get Logitech Capture and Streamlabs working with Rosetta 2. Yeah, they should be able to. Do they not? Because I was able to stream with the M1 MacBook Air back when I had that. I plugged in my Cam Link, and this same camera, this same setup I'm doing right now, I've done with the M1 chip. I know it's not impossible. I don't know why some people have had issues with the Cam Link and others haven't. I don't really know what the difference is there, because I use the exact same hardware. I didn't have to buy anything different. The same cables and same adapters I'm using to stream right now is the same cables and adapters I plugged into the M1, and it was fine. I have T-Mobile and still can't get Wi-Fi calling at my parents' farmhouse in Scottsville, Virginia, and they have T-Mobile as well. Well, T-Mobile doesn't have, I think, the best coverage in the world, but yeah, now I'm excited to watch this launch. It's going to happen in a few minutes. So do watch it. I don't think I'll be live for the whole I don't think I'll be live to react to it, but Chris Snorton donated 100 bits saying people like spending more than they have in the UK. Okay, I believe it wasn't just an American problem, but from what I recall, credit cards have higher incentives in the US, and they have a lot of cash back, and they have a lot of credit limits in the US. I don't know if that's the same in the UK, but I just remember a lot of people asking that the Apple Card would come to their country because credit cards are barely a thing. Outside the US, they don't have the same cashback rewards and that type of thing. So people are like, when is the Apple Card coming? And it's like, the banks are all different in those countries. It's very difficult to just open a credit card in more than one country. That's why the Apple Card's pretty much still over 2 years later, pretty much just a US thing. But I'm curious now, what's the average amount of debt for someone in the UK? Average debt in the UK. I'm wondering if that's different. It's say about 9,200 pounds per person. Okay, that sounds pretty close to I don't know when that was calculated. That says December of 2020. Average amount of debt owed in the UK. How about average debt in the US? Doesn't say the. It's giving me the total. Americans carrying an average personal debt of $92,000. Holy crap. I don't know where they're getting that from. Consumer debt as of November 2020 is $14.2 trillion. See, those were the numbers I was remembering. Just look at the average credit card debt in America. It's insanity. I'm very thankful me and my wife don't have any, but so we're not part of the problem, but they're saying in the United States, that's an average of $30,000 of debt per household. Man, that's insanity. Nothing compared to the UK, but I don't know if those guidelines are equal. Yes, the EU regulates the amount the card companies can charge merchants, so their rewards are lower because their fees to the merchant are lower. Maybe that'll change in the UK after they leave. Have they still not left? I thought they left years ago or something. Chris Norton donated 100 bits and says, I can't get a credit card. That's too bad. Well, they're not the best thing in the world. No one. I've seen studies about, rich people or studies about people who have become millionaires, and none of them were just like, I used the right credit cards. It's never been like the key to a successful life. Well, you want to know the way I paid for this yacht and having 8 different houses on 3 continents? I signed up for that one Amex card. Like it's never the solution to becoming rich. It's always just like a little nifty thing. I like just getting cash back pretty quick, and I like how simple the Apple Card is. And also it adds a little bit of fraud protection, which is kind of nice. If you use your debit card everywhere, and someone gets a hold of the numbers and starts charging the card, it's a bit harder to mark debit card charges as fraudulent, whereas credit card, you're spending the bank's money technically. So when you flag something as fraudulent, it's a bit easier for them to just be like, hey, okay, that's not you. We'll get you a new card. And I haven't paid off the credit card right away at that time. So that means that they're not the thief who gets a hold of the numbers or hacks my credit card or something. They are using the bank's money, not mine. Whereas the debit card, they're using my money if they get a hold of that. So it's just a little bit of extra protection. They can mark debit charges as fraudulent. It's just a tad more complicated. I have actually had that happen before. I think it was on my wife's debit card or something. Somehow someone got a hold of it and was spending it. We contact the bank. They figured it out, but credit card's a bit easier. You can just kind of flag it fraudulent. Don't recognize that, and they go, okay, it's gone. The credit card market is a growing one here in India. A study showed 30 out of every 100 Americans own a credit card. Compared to that in India, 3 out of 100 people have a credit card. Banks are advertising credit cards a lot here. They're dangerous. You gotta know how to use them. In my opinion, the interest rate on credit cards shouldn't even matter, because I feel like you're probably using it wrong if you're carrying a balance month over month. I know that's what banks and companies want you to do with credit cards, but I think it's a terrible idea to pay for things you can't actually afford and then have an interest rate on them. To me, the only reason to use a credit card is to build your credit score so that when you apply for something reasonable like a home loan, you have a good track record of paying off debt, and they give you a good interest rate on the mortgage. And for the theft protection and the rewards, that's what I like about the Apple Card, is just getting 3% cash back on all things Apple. And you guys know me, I spend a lot of money on Apple products each year, so that cash back in itself is pretty helpful. And I use Apple Pay almost everywhere. Pretty much all our grocery stores and gas stations and stuff will support Apple Pay, and I get 2% back on that, which is nice. So I just like the cash back thing. I never carry a balance over the month. So the interest rate, I'm sure, on the Apple Card is pretty high compared to other credit cards, but I never pay interest. I've never once paid an interest fee for carrying a balance, so it doesn't matter to me. But I wouldn't recommend you use a credit card just so that you can buy things that you don't have the money for, although that's what the bank would rather you do, because that's how they make money off of you. But the rewards are nice, so that's what I'd recommend. But anyway, we got a SpaceX launch coming, guys. We got to watch this thing. I want to see the next Starlink launch. It should be happening very, very shortly. They usually stream it on their YouTube channel. I believe they're live right now, and they're even live streaming it on Twitter. So I know we're at T-3 minutes, but I want to go talk to my wife. And they scrub these things sometimes, so I'm going to go check on her. And I'll be watching the stream. You guys should watch it too. Don't watch mine. Give SpaceX the watch time, all right? Thank you all for watching. See you in the stars. Take care. Bye-bye.